Okay, well, welcome everybody. So nice to have so many of you here. Probably some people will be trickling in still. My name is Valerie Sloan. I work at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. And my background is in paleoclimate glacier history in Arctic and alpine areas. And now in the last 10 or 15 years, I've been working more in education. And so I do sort of workforce development kind of stuff. So I changed from doing science into education more fully. So this is one of the last summer workshop that we're hosting for the REU interns and other interested people. So we really welcome you. We're very fortunate today to have our guest speaker, Blake Stoner-Osborne, who is at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. And he has the experience, excuse me, of applying for an NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program, and he actually received one, and he's also advised people on it before. And he has a great presentation put together for you today. So welcome, Blake.
Hi, everyone. Great to meet you. Thanks for having me, Val. So like Val said, I am a graduate student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I applied 2 years ago when I was an undergrad going into grad school. And I just had a lot of help with the process, and that was just from other grad students that I had talked to and stuff. So I just want to pass that along to all of you all. And I would encourage you, if you also get a fellowship, to pass that knowledge along to other people as well. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in. So the NSF GRFP is the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. And what is that? It's basically your golden ticket to get into grad school if you're not already there. If you are currently in grad school, then it is going to provide you funding for about 3 years of your PhD, master's, whatever graduate degree you're pursuing. So the stipend that you get from getting this fellowship is $37,000 per year. It just went up for the fall 2023 year. So if you get it, this will be your stipend in the fall. That is pretty competitive compared to what a lot of grad schools do pay. You get $12,000 in tuition coverage. So that will cover all costs of attending whatever program you're in. And you also get access to the NSF intern program, which could be a whole other presentation, but they have this really awesome program where you can connect with different agencies, whether it be government, private, whatever. And they give you funding basically to intern for an agency. So that's almost like a 4th year of funding that they give you. You can basically cherry pick what years you get it. If you're doing a PhD, for example, it's usually 5 to 7 years. You can pick which 3 of the years you get covered by the stipend. All right, so the very first thing is, if you're going to apply to the NSF GRFP, I really highly recommend that you read the solicitation. It is a monster. It's like 40 pages, but there's a lot of really great information in there. We will go through a lot of that information in this presentation, but still a great thing to do if you're looking to apply. And so the program solicitation you can find on their website. I just said it's like 40 pages, it's 18, but make sure you read it, all of it carefully. It has a lot of eligibility requirements, applications for applying, and review criteria and deadlines. So those are some important things. This is a screenshot from the year that I did it, so ignore these dates. They'll be updated at the end of this slide, I have a screenshot of it that's updated at the end of the presentation. So the application itself is composed of a few different components. You will write a 3-page personal statement, you will write a 2-page research statement, and you will need 3 letters of rec. Underneath each of these statements that you're going to have to write, there's an intellectual merit section and a broader impacts section. And those are the things that NSF really cares about for these applications. We'll go through what that means, but you need to have a separated intellectual merit and broader impacts section in each parts of this application. So what is that intellectual merit and broader impact? Intellectual merit just means the potential to advance knowledge in whatever form that looks like, and broader impacts, which is the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. Again, this is all in the solicitation, but under your personal statement, you need to talk about the things that you've done in the past that have advanced knowledge, and the broader impacts you've done, basically helping society, and how you've basically connected your research to a societal positive outcome. In your research statement, that intellectual merit is how your study would be advancing science, and then the broader impacts would be how are you going to communicate those results to the public. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the personal statement. And I'm just going to give you some tips and advice and maybe like a general idea of how to structure these personal statements. So this is an example of a personal statement. This is mine, and a lot of people follow this, general format. You will start with a background section to basically just tell anyone who's reviewing or looking at your statement who you are, what you're interested in, and how you got to where you are. And then we'll go down to intellectual merit, and this is where you're going to describe any research experience that you have, any projects you've done, let's say internships that were research oriented, things like that will be an intellectual merit. And again, we'll go through all these sections in a second, so no need to worry. Then intellectual merit is continued over here. This is where we start the broader impact section. And yes, you do need to put a header for each of those. You should put a header for intellectual merit and broader impacts. That's what they ask for in the solicitation.
I like that you, Blake, I like that you've put in bold various phrases or sentence fragments to highlight what's important.
Absolutely. And at the end of this, I'll give you a couple links of resources. And there's a guy named Alex Lang who has a great website, and he has a bunch of sample statements that have been awarded the fellowship. And every single one of them does this bolded thing where you basically are going to be bolding the skills that you learned and took out of the different research projects that you've done. So yeah, this is the broader impact section. You're going to start going into anything you've done, like clubs, organizations, outreach, volunteer stuff, like all of that will go under broader impacts. And then here's the final page of that 3-page personal statement. The broader impacts are continued. And the last thing they ask for is a future goals section where you're telling them why you want to go to grad school, why you want this fellowship, and how that will help project you into the career that you want. And then there's a little section for references if you have any publications that you'd like to throw in that application. Okay, so let's kind of go through each of those segments and what you would put in there. And I will happily send out the slides after this if Val is able to distribute. So no need to take furious notes or anything. Okay, so usually what I recommend is for the personal statement, you have about a half a page for the introduction, a full page for intellectual merit, a full page for broader impacts, and then a little half page for the future goals. And that together will give you your 3 pages of your personal statement. So what should you put in each of these sections? The other thing, sorry, before I move on, is it's great to have a theme that connects all of your research and your outreach experiences. So just for example, I did a lot of different research things in undergrad that didn't seem related at all. I did a project on frogs, I did a project on mosquitoes, I worked with coral, and those are all very, very different. But my unifying theme that I was able to pull out of that is it was all Pacific Island-based research. So the frogs were in Indonesia, the mosquitoes were in French Polynesia, and then the corals were in Micronesia. So I kind of tried to pull this theme of Pacific Island ecology out of those 3 things. So however you can relate your research experiences, you want a unifying theme underneath them. And for a lot of people, that might be more streamlined than what I've had for my experiences. All right, so for the background and the introduction, here are some things that they would like you to know, or the things that you should tell them that they want to know about you. They want to know who you are, like what makes you you, and what's your identity, and how does that project you into your science field. And then they also would like you to communicate which STEM topics are you passionate about and why, and what unique perspective do you bring to STEM. These are all things that can go into the background and introduction section, and you can elaborate more on your research experiences in the intellectual merit. They just want to make sure that they're getting really diverse candidates that are good in quality. So these are things to keep in mind as you're writing your background and your introduction. For the personal statement under intellectual merit, what past research experiences have you had? That's what they want you to highlight here. What skills have you learned from your research experiences, and what skills are you hoping to then build on in graduate school? So what's your scientific toolkit that you're going in with, and what are the skills that you want to develop as you move forward? And lastly, what makes you qualified to go to graduate school? They're trying to pick people that will be successful in grad school, and they want to see that you've had research experiences and that you are basically able to be a self-sustained graduate student once you get to school. A lot of skills just that you can, pull on from experiences you've got is the following. You can talk about how you have project design, fieldwork experience, lab procedural experience, data analysis experience, data visualization, modeling, academic writing. If you have publications, you have experience writing publications, giving conference presentations, and experience doing education and outreach. These are all things that will show them that you are ready to be a graduate student. So for example, you could say, you know, I had this internship at, let's say, the zoo, and we were doing research on growth rates of a certain kind of animal. That's all well and good, but the part you want to emphasize is what skills did you take out of that? You probably designed the project that you were working on. You probably went out and collected your data and did, you know, this field work of, you know, measuring animals and growth rates and things like that. You probably also put your data into spreadsheets and manipulated them and made graphs. And then maybe you also had a presentation for the public at the end for education and outreach. So those are things that you want to say, hey, I had this internship. Here's a brief little blurb about what it was. The part they care about is what skills did you learn from that internship. So those are all things that you can put in the intellectual merit section. And we'll look at some examples of that in a second. So let's move on to the broader impact section. What do they care about? So NSF is really, they have a really great initiative to increase diversity and access to science through this fellowship. So what they want to see is that, first of all, they're selecting diverse candidates. And second of all, they're selecting candidates that will help in those goals that they have. So things you want to mention in the broader impact section are things like, how has your previous research impacted broader non-STEM communities? What kind of clubs and organizations have you been a part of? Within those clubs and organizations, did you interact with society at all in order to improve? And lastly, how has your previous research involvement promoted diversity and inclusion in STEM? So these are all things that they like to hear about. If you've been part of a club that does outreach, like that, those are great things to mention. Like sports clubs and things like that aren't necessarily as valuable as some of these other clubs that are kind of showing that you are invested in the community and you're getting out and you're basically improving society in some way, shape, or form. Okay, and then the very last thing that they ask about is the future goals in the personal statement. So in the future goals section, basically they just want to know, what are your career goals for after graduation? What are your personal goals? What are your career goals? What are your personal goals? And lastly, how will the GRFP help you attain those goals that you have? So if you know you want to be a researcher with a government organization, that's great. And you can say, I'm going to graduate school to get a degree to basically help me get this job. And the GRFP could help me through the NSF intern program. I could potentially intern with them before I have to work for them, or things like that. So other things to mention are just like the GRFP is stipend. It's how you get into graduate school. It's great connections. Like those are all things that the GRFP will help you do to attain these career goals and personal goals. Okay, does anyone have any questions about the personal statement before we move on? And I think there's some.
Yeah, there's some sort of in the chat. And also Lisa Rome from the NSF is here also able to answer questions as well. So people are wondering about, you know, do jobs count too? And I'm wondering about if you don't have the time or money, for instance, to participate in, say, clubs, you know, what other things count? And so Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess I would say that with jobs, you know, it's especially if you can say that you had some kind of like leadership or teaching or managing or initiative in the job and that you were there loyally for however long. I think personally that makes sense, but Lisa, maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yes, that's correct. Not everyone has research experience, or they have often had to work through undergraduate or whatever. And so we do count those things, and we all know that some of the qualities that make you successful in grad school are resilience and ability to overcome challenges. So you can always talk about those sorts of experiences that you've had. So thanks for asking that question.
Absolutely. And something else that's really great is if you can show adaptability. Like a lot of us that were in school when the pandemic hit, and that took away a lot of research opportunities. So what kinds of things were you able to do to get involved, to show initiative, to do all those things while you were in the middle of a pandemic? You know, like those are also things that are, I think, valuable to mention. Yeah, so for jobs and stuff, like I think for any, CV, resume, application, the important part is what can you tell the reviewers that you got out of that experience? I think, the one sentence little blurb about what it was is great, but what they care about is this is what I took out of that experience. This is what I'm capable of. And this is what I will be using when I go to graduate school to lean on as my toolkit. So I think those are all important things. And you can certainly get opportunities like that out of jobs and other things. Other questions, do the broader impacts have to relate to STEM? That's kind of a tricky one, I guess, but I would say like anything that you're doing within STEM to communicate that to communities, whether it's volunteer work, working with communities, like that's all really good and important stuff. Other volunteer work, I think still shows that initiative and that you're getting involved in the community. So I think it's still like worthwhile to mention those things.
Yeah, I agree. It's if you're tutoring a child in your neighborhood or you're a, Girl Guide, Girl Scout leader or something that's not in STEM, but you're gaining skills and experience. So that shows leadership.
And then, sorry, let me pull up the chat again. Do you have any advice on how to show, not tell in your personal statement? That's a great question. So with any, essay, personal statement, like it is important to show, not tell, but sometimes it is okay to tell. Like when we're going with this whole like bolding the things that you took away, to me, that seems a little more like, here's the experience I had. This is what I took away from it. Like you do have limited space in this personal statement. So sometimes getting straight to the point is okay. Other times, reviewers will start to understand like, hey, I had this opportunity. I took this leadership role. I did this, that, and the other thing. And they'll start to see those things that you did that showed initiative. And then you also want to back those up with skills and stuff that you've learned. So showing, not telling is kind of a difficult thing in terms of writing. I'm going to give you Alex Lang's website, and I encourage you to just go through and read through some of the successful personal statements and see how people manage that showing and not telling. And when you read through those, like you can kind of emulate your personal statement off of how they designed theirs, and then put in your own little creative twists on it too. Sorry if that wasn't as helpful. It's really hard to show, not tell. I think writing's very difficult, especially about yourself. Let's see, what other questions?
One person messaged me asking how many people can receive this fellowship, which I think maybe we should punt over to Lisa Rome.
Right. In the past, we have awarded about 2,000 a year across all of NSF topics. This coming year, we hope to have a few extra. I think Congress is currently discussing allowing us maybe 2,100 or something like that. So, but on that order. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think along with that, depending on what section you apply for, there's different numbers of awards based on the applicants. And Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, but like, for example, like the life sciences section usually gets a lot more applicants than say geosciences. So the number of awards are kind of scaled to how many applicants are in each section.
Yeah, we try to have similar success rates across the different fields. So we're covering everything from computer science to engineering to biology to social sciences. So we have a broad set of awards.
Robert, you have a question?
Yeah, so we're looking at like this kind of outline of the application components. Is this all of the application, or is there also like, I'm assuming like a resume, transcript, stuff like that as well?
Yeah, so there are, this was about 2 years ago, so I'm trying to remember exactly the components, but yeah, there is like a little bit of like a resume CV section. Yeah. I think you just submit that. There's the letters of rec, the personal statement, the research statement. Everything that's required that you need to submit is in that solicitation. And when you go through the portal, it kind of prompts you to put in all of the things. So in this presentation, I'm focusing on, the statements and the letters of rec, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think there is a CV component as well.
And transcripts.
transcripts, I believe.
I'm sure all that stuff, like just kind of like your general application stuff. All right, thank you.
Right. No problem. Any other questions before we move on to the research statement?
Yeah,
Oh,
there's
do
one.
we need transcripts from all schools if we transferred colleges? I think yes,
It's most likely.
but I'm not totally sure on that.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the research statement component. So again, we have that intellectual merit and that broader impact section, and this statement is going to be 2 pages rather than 3 for the personal statement. So this is just an example again of what that might look like. For the research statement, you want to start with the background. What is your study topic? What work has been done already in this field, and what will you be studying in your actual proposal? So a lot of questions people have about this is, do you need to write a research proposal about the topic you will be doing for your dissertation? The answer is no. The point of this research statement is basically just to show that you are capable of putting together a proposal. So that can be things that you did in undergrad. You can write your proposal based on that. If you have an idea of what you want to do in grad school, you can propose the project that you'll actually be doing. I ended up proposing the project that I'm currently working on, and that's great, but you don't have to by any means. So again, this background is just think about the background section of a research paper. You're having a condensed little background section of a research paper to let people know what it is you're studying. Then we're going to have a section that's all of the details of your project. It's your hypotheses, your methods, the resources you'll be leaning on, things like that. This was, a second section on details and hypotheses and methods because I had 2 research questions in mind. And then lastly, you're going to have your intellectual merit and your broader impact. So we'll go through what each of those sections will entail. Okay, so for the research statement, it's that 2 pages. I recommend about a 1/4 page for the background introduction, 3/4 of a page for the nitty gritty. What are the aims, hypotheses, that kind of stuff. Intellectual merit, about a 1/2 page, and then broader impacts about a 1/2 page. All right, so for the research statement, things that are important to put in the background in the introduction are a call to action. What is the study system and the topic that you're studying, and why is that so important? Why is it important to study that contemporarily? What is currently known about the system you're studying, and what are the knowledge gaps that you'll be contributing to put that puzzle together? And lastly, what are your specific research questions, and how are you going to test and answer them? With a lot of these proposals, if you can state all of that succinctly in the background, you're off to a great start because the researchers know what your question is, the knowledge gaps you're trying to address, and why it's important to study those things. For the nitty-gritty and the details, things that are great to include are what are your specific hypotheses and the aims that you're trying to complete? What methods are you going to use to specifically answer or test those hypotheses? And how will you determine successful evaluation of your research questions? In other words, just an example here could be I have this hypothesis that there is more of this than there is of this. How am I going to test that? I'm going to go out in the field and use these methods to collect, to analyze, to do whatever you're going to do. And then successful evaluation could be, I'm going to perform this statistical test. If I get this value, then this. If I get that value, then that. So it's you're setting up a framework for how you can answer the questions that you put in your hypotheses. And then lastly, what is in the solicitation that the reviewers seem to care about is your project feasible? In other words, can you complete your project with the resources that are available at the university you proposed? So just for an example, I work in an isotope facility here at UH, and my project utilizes isotopes. So part of my is my project feasible was I said there is an isotope lab at UH, and I would be advised by the professor that runs that lab. So those are just examples of things that you can include in the nitty-gritty that will kind of help reviewers see what your project is and how you'll be successful in answering your research questions. So then for intellectual merit, how will this study advance scientific knowledge in your field? So we kind of touched on that earlier with the knowledge gaps, this is how you're going to be improving scientific knowledge. What pieces are you adding? Are you adding components to a model that will help refine the model? Are you answering questions that have to do with, cycling, like biogeochemical cycling, like you're putting another piece in that puzzle of the cycle? Things like that are how you are going to be advancing knowledge in your field. What makes your research novel and cutting edge? We love in science to see that we're progressing the field, that we're coming up with new methods, that we're coming up with new techniques and things like that. So if there's any component of your project that's cutting edge, new, novel, like that's a great thing to mention here in the intellectual merit portion. Will your findings contribute essential information that lays the foundation for new exploration? I like this little image here, but is this like a pilot study that you're going to do that's going to open the door for a bunch of other studies in this field? Things like that are really, really cutting edge and new, and they're laying foundation for new exploration. All right, so then for the broader impact section, how is your study going to benefit society? How will you make your study widely available and digestible for the public? Will you be planning any education and outreach with your study? Will you be planning to go to, say, museums or to events where you can put your research on display and kind of talk to folks about it? That's how your research might be impacting broader society. Can your findings be directly applied to current problems in communities, to government, to policy? Things like that are all going to be contributing to your broader impacts section. So basically just communicating your research with the public. How are you making it accessible? How are you basically improving society with your research? All right, so does anyone have any questions about the research statement? I'm seeing some in the chat, so I'll read through these. Did you have previous research experience at UH when you applied through summer research or already in grad school? Yes, I did my undergrad in California, and I had some research opportunities when I was in undergrad that I wrote about for the intellectual merit in the personal statement. In the research statement, the intellectual merit is more about, it's more about your study and how that's going to basically advance scientific knowledge. Whereas before, the intellectual merit might have been more about like, what skills did you take away for your personal intellectual merit, and how will that help you be successful in grad school? This question, how did you come up with your research idea for this research statement? What suggestions do you have for those of us that do not know what our research interests are yet? That's a great question. So for me personally, I didn't know what I wanted to do for grad school exactly. And then what I did is I ended up talking to a bunch of different grad students and just asking their advice on this whole process. And a lot of them recommended that I start talking to, researchers, to professors, to other grad students that were in the general field that I wanted to be in. So I wanted to be, in the marine biology field, and I'm really into like big fish, like tuna and mahi-mahi and, those kinds of predators. And so I reached out to a bunch of scientists that work on those things just to talk to them. And something that I asked was like, what is your research? Like, what are the questions that you try to address? And then the one that really helped me narrow down on a research idea was this last question of, if you had unlimited time and money, what's the next question that you would try to address? And it's so funny because like 4 out of 6 of the researchers I talked to had the same answer for that last question. And I was like, oh, so this is something that is not known in the field that people would like to know if they had more time and money. And so then I took that research question and I basically wrote this proposal around it. And that's what I'm studying currently. So I'm using isotopes and gut content methods basically to look at diet of these big predatory fish to see what kinds of resources they're trying to tap into. So that was something that I did to kind of explore my research interests. So just really talking to people and getting their advice is really important. Kelsey asks, if you are currently in grad school, do you recommend waiting until your second year to write your proposal so you can get started on your research and have a better idea of what to write about in your proposal? That's a great question. So if you're currently in grad school, you only get to apply once. It's either your first year or your second year if you're in your PhD program. I don't really have any specific advice on which one is, quote unquote, better. I think you can apply in either year, but if you feel like in your second year you have more context for your research proposal, it's fine to do it in your second year or your first. It's kind of up to personal preference. Lisa, I don't know if you have any insight on that.
Yeah, if you can wait until your second year, I think that's often useful. But you know, some people feel like they really want to get started, so that's also fine. In the review process, we tell reviewers to take consideration of the level of the students. So if you're an undergraduate, we know that you haven't perhaps had any research experience, and we should not expect a really polished research proposal. In your first year, that's also true. So the review standards, if you will, for those levels are less stringent than they are perhaps for a second year, where we would expect a more polished research proposal. But that's really, hopefully we address that in the review process.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. And then Val, did you have a comment as well?
Well, there's a question about, can you take one of these fellowships abroad? And so I thought I would ask Lisa if that's possible to study abroad.
You could go abroad, but you have to, the award has to be to a US institution. So some institutions have international campuses, but it has to be a US institution because we're a US government agency and we can only give money to US entities.
Okay, good to know. Thanks.
All right, next question in the chat from Martina. Does this fellowship provide support if you're looking to get into a master's program or only PhD/postdoc programs? Is this program self-directed or do you need to be in a graduate program? Great question. So this is all in the eligibility section of the solicitation. If you are applying to a master's program for the first time, you don't currently have a master's degree, you can apply for the NSF GRFP and get this to fund your master's. If you have a master's currently and are applying to a PhD, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong again, but I think you're not eligible if you already have a master's degree.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So you can apply as an undergrad that is trying to go to graduate school for, the first time, and you can apply as many times as you want until your first year of graduate school, and then you can only apply once if you haven't received it by then. So if you're a first or second year grad student, you only get one application. Once you're in grad school, you can apply as an undergrad. And then if you have a master's degree, I think you're not eligible. And yes, Lisa.
Yeah, just a correction on that. If you have a master's degree, you're not eligible unless you've been out of school for at least, out of school after your master's for at least 2 years.
Awesome. Thank you for the correction. Yeah, and the eligibility portion of the solicitation has all this. And so if you read through that, that might answer your questions. And then if you still have more questions, I think there's a email that you can reach out to with specific questions like that. And then the second part of the question was, is this program self-directed or do you need to be in a graduate program? You can be applying to a graduate program or currently in one and apply either way. Okay, from Manasi, can you write about your undergraduate research and then just expand on your future goals as the research statement? Yeah, so you can base your research proposal off of things that you've done in undergrad, and that's a topic that you might be knowledgeable on because you've done a lot of reading for that, you've worked on the project a little bit, and so that might help you write the research statement. And then absolutely, if you want to expand on that project and put in new aspects of it, that will definitely help you with your research statement, and you can, maybe even continue that work in graduate school if you're awarded. Did that answer your question? Okay. Next question. What if you don't do the research you said you would? Totally fine. Again, the whole point of the research statement is just to see if you can condense all of your thoughts that are up here. If you can condense it into a research proposal that seems feasible, that makes sense, like that has, clear and concise hypotheses and methods and those kinds of things, I think that's what's more important than necessarily doing the project that you proposed. This fellowship is basically the way that I was described this fellowship as is they're funding you, they're not funding your project that you proposed. They're funding you as an individual that's going to be successful in grad school, that's going to make a lot of great scientific discoveries, that's going to help in the community. They're funding you as an individual rather than the project you propose. So you don't have to do the project that you proposed in your research proposal. Okay, that's a note from Val. So what you write doesn't necessarily have to be what you pursue. Oh, Val, that's a great point. So when you're filling out the application, you put in a university that you are going to be attending or that you hope to attend. You don't have to go to that university either. If you're awarded the fellowship, then you can basically afterwards confirm what university you're attending. So for example, I applied to UH, I applied to Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I applied to University of Rhode Island. I put University of Hawaii in my application, but I hadn't been admitted anywhere yet. So let's say I got the fellowship and decided to go to Rhode Island, totally fine. I just tell them afterwards that my institution has changed to Rhode Island. So that's a great point. Can that school be in Canada? I think as Lisa said, it has to be a US institution unless there's, an international campus. Okay, does the master's thing apply in PhD programs where you get your master's after the first year? Would you not be able to apply after the first summer? Lisa, would you mind taking that one?
Yeah, there are special rules for the 5-year master's programs if you're doing like an undergraduate, and I am not really clear on those. And those cause us trouble all the time. So I would check with the GRFP program managers on that one.
Awesome, thanks, Lisa. Okay, Rebecca asks, how did you come up with your research idea for this research statement? What suggestions? Okay. I think I already addressed that question. Okay, does anyone else have any more questions before we move on to, we're gonna go through some reviewer criteria next, but any questions on the research statement before we move on? My school already provides for my tuition and stipends, so I'm mainly looking for research funding. Is this the correct opportunity to apply for? So this is kind of an interesting question that I've also kind of like gone through as well. Is this fellowship was my stipend for graduate school, but they don't necessarily have a robust budget for your research project. So you have little pockets of money that are available to you. I think it's like $5,000 and every school does it differently. They give us a certain portion of that as a stipend, and then they give us a cost of education proposal. So I can say, hey, I need this amount of money to run samples, and they'll give me like $1,000 to do it. That depends completely on which university you go to. So if you're looking for thousands and thousands of dollars to do a research project, other fellowships that you apply for, or other grants that you apply for with your professor might provide more of that concrete funding. This is more about the stipend, but that's just been my experience. Lisa, I don't know if you have a different view of the whole system or.
No, that's correct. We really don't. It doesn't provide funding directly for your research.
Right. And but having this fellowship is great to have on your CV. If you have a stipend that your professor currently pays you and you get the GRFP, you can now support yourself, and that money could maybe bring on another student or something. So a lot of PIs love to encourage you to apply to this fellowship, even if they're already funding you on a grant. It basically just frees up money in their department. Same with the tuition. Now that tuition is being paid by NSF rather than the school or the lab. Awesome. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, awesome. So let's talk about the reviewer criteria a little bit. And Lisa is here to provide any insight as well. This is just grabbed straight from the solicitation. These are like, as you're writing your statements, these are things you should have mulling in the back of your mind to make sure that you address all of these criteria. So number one, which we've talked about a lot, is the intellectual merit and the broader impacts. Number one is, what is the potential for the proposed activity to advance knowledge and understanding within its own field or across different fields? How is your project and going to advance that knowledge? And how have you had opportunities that help you advance that knowledge? Broader impacts, how is your study going to benefit society or advance desired societal outcomes? And how have you as an individual also benefited society or advanced societal outcomes? Number two, to what extent do the proposed activities suggest and explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts? In other words, what are these new questions that you're asking that will help advance knowledge in science? Number three, is the plan for carrying out the proposed activities well-reasoned, well-organized, and based on sound rationale? Does the plan incorporate a mechanism to assess success? So again, this goes back to they're funding you, not necessarily the project that you proposed. They just want to see that your proposed activities are reasoned out, organized, based on sound rationale, and that you can assess success for your project. Number four is, how well qualified is the individual, team, or organization to conduct the proposed activities? So, this comes down to your personal statement with your intellectual merit. What toolkit have you built? What skills do you have as an individual that would make you successful for this project? In the research proposal, if you're saying, I'm going to be working with this professor from this lab and we have these tools at our disposal, your team and your organization are ready to conduct those proposed activities. Another thing that I encourage writing about is, if you can collaborate with let's say a government organization or something within your project, that's helping you to collaborate in order to advance science, which also shows great collaboration and initiative. So for example, in mine, I work a little bit with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They have these research they have a longline fleet that goes out and basically catches a bunch of tuna, and they tag stomachs to be sent to me that I can then open up and look at the diets of. So that's an example of how I'm collaborating with NOAA to get samples, for example. So the team, the individual, the organization, that's how qualified and how able we are to run, this project, for example. And lastly, number five, are there adequate resources available to the PI, either at the home organization or through collaborations, to carry out the proposed activities? And I might have jumped the gun a little bit. There's those collaborations that you can throw out there. Okay, so that's the reviewer criteria. Are there any questions on that? I have a question for Lisa about the broadening impacts part of the research statement. Yeah, go for it, Val.
So Lisa, this is sometimes a confusing concept of, how does my research, how does it have an impact on society? And, is it just by furthering science, or is it, more applied? If it's more applied, that's maybe having a bigger impact. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that and maybe give a couple of examples to help people understand that, including me.
Sure. It can be just that you're advancing the science. That is acceptable. But hopefully you've got some other ideas about how your science might be impacting society. For instance, if you're working on things like lead in the water, you can talk about how that could impact communities. Maybe you're working on gut content of tuna, and it's going to have an impact on the food chain for certain communities. It could be, I don't know, mining or some other aspects of, if you're working in the deep sea, for instance, and that there are plans to do some deep sea mining, the impact on that local ecosystems. There are many different ways of saying, it doesn't have to be something that you're going to look into, but just how the work that you're doing might be used in the future. So it's not something that you have to do. So, okay.
Oh, that's really helpful. And so it sort of comes back to the question of why it's important.
Why it's important. Exactly.
Society.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
to add on to that, especially with the tuna example and the deep sea mining, that's stuff that my lab works on that people have wrote about in their applications before. For deep sea mining, if you're seeing how deep sea mining is going to affect the ecological communities, that's essential knowledge that needs to go into policy, that needs to go into how these things are operating. For tuna gut contents, if you're looking at where those tuna are going to be at any given time, and all of a sudden one of their food resources goes down, how are they going to adapt and change? And then how do you need to adapt fishing policy in turn for that to be able to accommodate? So things like that are very societal, and they might take a little bit of stepping stones to get to that societal outcome. But for any project, I think there's ways that you can tie that together. And if anyone wants to like brainstorm things, I'm happy to, if you email me, like I have my email at the end of this, I'm happy to brainstorm things with you to try to find themes, to try to find, you know, intellectual merit and broader impacts for the things that you've done or are going to do. So I'm just going to throw that out there. Another example is there's a lab here that works on viruses for phytoplankton. And you might think, how would that connect to the broader society of anything? And like, we just did a really great day at the Bishop Museum over here. And they had this whole game where they put baking powder and like whatever else in a balloon to show how a cell like blows up and lyses when a virus infects it. So like, that's broader impacts. People are learning about the ocean and the ecosystem that's literally all around them in Hawaii. So there's things like that that you can kind of tie into your broader impacts. You just have to be a little creative with it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Any other questions? All right. So I'm going to go through, I've just gone to Alex Lang's website and pulled reviewer comments. So he has examples of personal statements, examples of research statements, and then examples of the reviewer comments that reviewers gave for successful applications. And when you go through these, you can see a very common theme of like what the reviewers are looking for. So I've just gone through and kind of put some boxes around the important things that reviewers said. And notice these are scores of excellent and very good for the most part. So this one says the proposal is novel and interesting. It builds on the applicant's considerable experience in ecology and shows a deep understanding of ecological theory. They have a lot of mention of efforts for outreach and science communication. They want to collaborate with foreign scientists. They want to work on development and conservation agencies with their research. And then lastly, they have publications in review and in preparation. Here's one from astrophysics. The applicant has numerous research experiences, several presentations, as well as publications, reference letters that speak to the applicant's drive, independence, and skill. The applicant is involved with student organization activities. They express the importance of public outreach for them, and they wanted to do collaborative activities that engage the public. So hopefully you're starting to see a theme here is how are these folks going to be helping society in general via public outreach, via policy, via things like that? And what kinds of initiative are they showing? What kind of experience do they have? Those are the things that the reviewers are going to care about. This is from mine. This is a clear background and motivation for research, clear aims and methods, necessary resources to succeed in the project, importance of science education and communication, educate and engage underserved school communities, good adaptability, teaching and outreach for how it's going to influence marine policy, passionate, dedicated, dependable, hardworking, independent, things like that. So do you guys have any questions about the reviewer comments and how those might tie into how you're going to write your statements? Where did you get those? Those are from Alex Lang's website. I have to stop sharing to get the link, so I'll do that at the end of the presentation. And I also have like a little Google Drive with resources in it as well. So that's coming up in just a sec. Alrighty. So I'm also going to go through just kind of a timeline that you could follow. You don't have to. This is just, you know, what I did and my suggestion for you all, but feel free to do whatever works for you. The application is due in mid-October. So here is the timeline of what you might do. So now in mid to late August, you should read the solicitation, maybe create a little outline of what you want to talk about in your personal statement, including any research experiences you've had, other opportunities, things like that. start brainstorming a research project. Definitely reach out to scientists and start talking. People love to talk about themselves and their research. So if you just shoot an email and say, hey, I'm a student that's looking to go to graduate school, would you mind chatting with me about any tips and advice you have, and also maybe about some research questions that I could pursue? Like 9 times out of 10, you'll get a response that says, absolutely, when are you free? So definitely try to do that. Oh, thanks, Val, for doing the Alex Lang's website. And then the next thing that you should do now is notify your mentors that you'll be applying. Talk to them and see if they have any advice, but also let them know that you'll be needing a letter of rec from them so that they have a couple months to plan that and kind of get ready for your letters of rec. In early September, start writing rough drafts of the personal statements and research statements. They can be very rough, that's okay. Reach out to your mentors and potential PIs for help with the research statement. Having a professor help you with the research statement is really, really important. And I think they have a lot of insight that a lot of times we as students don't. So if that's a current, professor that you have, if that's a research mentor that you have, even a grad student or someone that you can connect with that can read over your research statement and that has experience writing research statements will be really helpful. In mid to late September, start asking a ton of people for feedback on your personal and research statements and start, editing and adjusting those. I had grad students read it. I had friends read it. I had my mom read it, because if my mom can understand my research statement and she's an English teacher, I know that I communicated well what I was trying to do. So just get as many eyes on your project as possible and make sure it reads cohesively, it makes sense, and it doesn't have to be people that are in your field that can read it and help you. Continue working with potential PIs on research statements. If you are not yet in grad school and you've reached out to some PIs about joining their lab, oftentimes you can just email and say, hey, I'm applying for the NSF GRFP. Do you have a second to meet with me and chat about potential research projects? If you're currently in grad school, your advisor, I'm sure, will be helping you with this statement. In early October, so we're starting to get closer to the deadline, start preparing your final drafts on the personal and research statements with all the comments everyone gave. Follow up with your letter of recommendation writers and say, hey, in 2 weeks, the deadline's coming up. And then here's the timeline continued. In mid-October, you're going to finalize your application and submit it. Follow up with your letter of recommendation writers, 3 days before, 2 days before, 1 day before. Make sure they submit it on time. And then these are the deadlines for each of the, sections. Life sciences is due October 17th. October 18th is all of these ones listed here. October 20th is engineering, and the 21st is the rest: chemistry, geosciences, math, and physics and astronomy. Okay, so does anyone have any questions about anything that we touched on in this presentation that either Lisa or I can answer for you? Robert, hand up.
Yeah, so I was wondering a little bit about kind of timing. So this is for the 22 cycle, right? And this funding would be applied to the 23 graduate year.
Yes.
So if I applied for this in 2023, I would get the funding for the 2024 year.
Exactly. So right now you are applying, you would be notified that you got it in, let's say, March, April, May, and then the funding you would get would be to start graduate school in fall 2023. So in the very first slide of this presentation, I put it's the 2023 GRFP. I applied in 2020, got the funding in 2021. You'd be applying in 2022, getting the funding in 2023.
Okay.
Good question. Any others about literally anything? Feel free to ask while we're here. Yeah, Lisa.
I see one question about the different deadlines is because we get so many proposals that it overwhelms our system. So we try to spread them out over the time frame so that nobody gets computer problems. But this gets back to the fact that you should try to submit early, because you might have computer problems. It might be us, it might be you, but you could miss the deadline if, for instance, your electricity goes out. So apply early if you can. You don't have to wait till the deadline. And also, I'm going to have to jump to another meeting, but I want to put a link in the chat here for intern proposals. Blake mentioned this at the beginning of the meeting, but it's for graduate students. You don't have to be a GRFP awardee, actually. There are intern opportunities. If you want to work, say, at the USGS or with NOAA or with the ONR or some other organization within the federal government, you can contact those scientists, say, I want to come work with you. You get a 6 month, up to 6 months of your salary and time to go work, time away from graduate school to go work with those faculty. And that's available for not just GRFPs, but any NSF funded grad students. And Blake, I want to say you've done a fabulous job. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to leave early, but hope to be reading some proposals from this group eventually. Thanks.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for your
much.
insight,
Okay.
Lisa.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, back to questions. I'll do my best to answer them. I am not Lisa. She is,
And you can
well
stop
knowledgeable,
sharing
but
it
I'll do my best.
if you want.
Oh yeah, before I stop sharing, I'm just gonna do, this is my contact info. Feel free to write down my email. Like I said, if you just want to brainstorm things that you could write about or whatever, I'm happy to jump on a Zoom call with you and just start drafting things. So feel free to reach out. Keep in mind, I am a grad student. I'm very, very busy as well. So I might not get to you immediately, but we will set up a time to try to make it work. So yeah, that's it. Feel free to reach out, and then I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing.
Yeah. So if anybody has other questions, please, go ahead.
Also, sorry, before we jump to that, I'm also going to give you a link to, this is, okay, here's the first link. This is a GRFP application guide. It is pretty much step-by-step what you can do. The timelines are in there, examples of statements are there. Just kind of read through that as a first step. And then if you have questions later, please feel free to reach out to me about that. I also have a step-by-step guide on how to apply to graduate school. Oops, how to grad school. Grad school applications, we could have a whole nother workshop on this, but they're not like undergrad where you just submit an application and fingers crossed that someone admits you. It's very pointed towards a PI. So you reach out to a PI, and if they want to admit you as a student in their lab, they can admit you to the school. So it's a very different process, but feel free to read about how to apply there. Again, step by step. If you have any questions, let me know. Programs are not uniform. Some programs are like you apply and then get admitted, fingers crossed, but not all are like that, and most are not like that. So feel free to read through those and let me know.
Blake, do you think that, it seems to me that the help you gave today on writing a personal statement and a research statement could be useful in applying to graduate school?
Absolutely. I copied and pasted my research proposal and my personal statement from the GRFP application for my application to UH.
Oh,
so you obviously want to adjust certain things that are school specific, but yeah, this is the foundation that you will use for all your other applications. So it's a worthwhile exercise for sure. Even if you don't get it, it's great to put these things down. Okay, there's tons of questions in the chat. So let me scroll back and okay. I think the first one that's new that we haven't got to is if you are applying as a grad student, does it make sense to ask professors from undergrad to write letters for you? That's a great question, and I wish Lisa was still here. So I would say yes, like if there's someone in undergrad that can really speak to some of the research experiences you talked about in your personal statement, I don't see why not. However, you should definitely have your graduate advisor be one of your letter of rec writers, because they'll probably know you best.
if you're already in grad school.
Yes, if you're already in grad school, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in your first year, maybe your professor doesn't know you super well yet, but they can write you a letter. So I guess maybe just weigh who could write you the best letter.
And if you haven't applied to if you haven't gotten into graduate school yet, you don't have a person there. But yes, the professors that you've taken classes with, preferably upper level classes, maybe you've done a project with them or field trips. Maybe you've worked with them on some research or something. That's what's going to be valued the highest. Avoid like academic advisors, people like me, avoid high school teachers, because what they want to hear about is how you are in terms of doing science.
Yeah, and I should have had a slide on this for the letters of rec, but someone had told me when I was applying to have like 2 kind of like academic / science-based letters of rec, and the third one can be someone who can speak to your broader impacts. Like if you did an internship, let's say at an aquarium, right, and you were giving presentations to the public about whatever, maybe that's not your research, but they can speak really well to your broader impact section. So the letters are really important because they'll tell the reviewers directly, like, this is a dedicated person. This is someone who takes initiative. This is someone who cares about public education and outreach. Like you want to cover the whole spectrum of who you are in your letter writers. So it doesn't just have to be a science person. It can also be someone you did an internship with per se. Okay. Next question. Are these deadlines for the upcoming year, like to get into grad school in August 2023? Yes. These deadlines, you are applying in October to get funding in spring to then go to school in fall. Why do different disciplines have different deadlines? I think Lisa answered that. It's just to kind of spread out the portal so that it doesn't, crash. Thank you for the info. I have to leave. Yeah, no worries. So we should do this application as we apply to grad school. Yes, because when you're applying to graduate school, you're going to reach out to a bunch of different professors, and the most common response that you will get is, sorry, I don't have funding for you right now. This is a caveat to that. If you get your own funding, they can admit you into their lab, even if they don't have a grant to put you on at the moment. So my current advisor, when I reached out, he was like, hey, just so you know, I can't admit you unless you come in with your own funding because I don't have a grant for you. And I said, that's fine. I'm applying to the GRFP. Let's keep in touch. And then later I emailed him and I was like, oh my God, I got it. Can I come to your lab? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. You can fund yourself for 3 years. And then by the 4th year, we'll try to get you on a grant. And we're going to start writing that grant, sometime later this year or next year. So, yes, you should be applying as you're applying to graduate school. And I know a few of you are already in graduate school, and that's a completely different thing. You're applying to get funding for yourself and to basically have like this great thing to put on your CV. Okay, I hope I answered the question. Are there circumstances under which reviewers would ever consider applicants as overqualified? I don't think so. Like, hopefully you've had, some experiences that you can write about. If you wouldn't be going to graduate school if you had like infinite research opportunities and everything under your belt. You'd be like, oh, I already have all these skills, I'm just going to go get a job. So I don't think there's such thing as being overqualified. Like Lisa was saying, a lot of these are like, intellectual merit from like research experiences you've had. A lot of people haven't had those in undergrad, and that's okay to acknowledge. Is like, that can be, part of your intellectual merit is, while I didn't have the privilege of being able to to have a research opportunity, and I did have to support myself through school, so I had other jobs, I'm going to write about those rather than, the research experiences you had. So try not to think of it as, overqualified or underqualified. Any experiences you have, as long as you communicate what you've learned, what skills you have, those kinds of things, that's what they care about. Okay, sorry, that was a little bit winded, but if we get funding for 3 years, but our master's program is finished within 2 years, what happens to the extra year of funding? Can we use that if we want to pursue a PhD? Yes. So my friend Anella at Scripps, she got the GRFP, did her master's, which was only 2 years. And then when she was reaching out to advisors for her PhD, she said, hey, I already have a year of funding. Will you let me into your lab? And they were like, yes. So that can carry on over into your PhD. Some master's programs are 3 years, and you might use all 3 years of your funding. Okay, and then those are my notes. Thank you. Okay, you're welcome. If we get funding for 3 years, but our master's program is finished. Oh, that's the same question. Okay. Work for a college application consultancy thing for the person. Yeah, okay. Thank you, very helpful. Will we get access to the Zoom recording as well? Yes, Val will be sending that out. Okay. Is there a chance you get the grant in spring, but not into grad school? Can you get into a grad school with the grant if you initially got turned down by that school? Great question. Okay. Great question. Okay. I'm going to tell you my personal story is I reached out to like a ton of professors. Basically, everyone told me they didn't have funding. And I was like, well, this sucks because I can't go to grad school if I don't get in anywhere. So come time for admittance, I got into University of Rhode Island, wasn't really excited about going. And so I was going to wait and see if I got the GRFP to go to another school. I technically got rejected from Scripps, and then Jeff, my current advisor at UH, told me he wasn't going to admit me unless I had funding. So I had 2 rejections and 1 acceptance. I then got the GRFP, reached out to all 3 again, and now I was admitted to Rhode Island, to Scripps, and to Hawaii because I had the funding. So grad school is a funding game. Nobody tells you this, but you can't get in unless there's some way to sign your paycheck. And that's coming from a grant, from your fellowship, from any of those things.
Yeah,
So
and
when you
TH.
get the GRFP, you are funding yourself and they can sign your admittance because you have funding for you. It's a different story if the lab is full, like if they have 8 students and they can't take another one, they still might reject you even if you have the GRFP because the professor just doesn't have time. Did that answer your question? I hope so. Okay, this one is relevant, so I'm just gonna do it. Did you apply to only 3 schools? I did, because I do a very niche thing with these big predators and isotopes. There are only 3 advisors out there that really could have helped me with my project. So I only applied to the 3, but I would say try not to apply to more than 10. Grad school applications are so expensive, and it's just like you want to build relationships with the professors you're applying to. I kind of say it's like dating. You're dating all these people, you are sending them an email trying to see if they're interested in you and you're interested in them, and then if they are, they'll invite you on a couple dates to like visit the lab or like to meet their students or to like chat with them on Zoom or stuff like that. And so by the time you've applied to 10 schools, it's really hard to keep up that relationship with 10 different people. So start like ranking where you would want to go and maybe continue with the top 5. Okay, if I take a year between grad school and undergrad and apply during that interval, would I get to submit another while I'm in grad school if I didn't get it the first time? Yes. So before you are a first-year student, you can apply and submit as many times as you want. I have a friend that applied in his senior year. He took 1 year as a lab tech and applied that year, and he's applying again this year. So he's all good until he's the first-year grad student, and then he only gets 1 application between year 1 and year 2.
Oh, so he applied during a gap year.
Yes, he applied during a gap year, and it's so funny. He's gotten honorable mentions twice now, and so I think that the next time he's gonna get it. So other thing is honorable mentions is great. They only have so many awards, but honorable mentions is like, we would have given this to you if we had 1 more award to give. So don't be disappointed if you get honorable mentions. It's a really great thing. Okay, where am I? Okay, how are you to be sure the funding will cover everything? Does that depend on the school? Can you clarify? What do you mean by everything?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, I don't know if each school has their own cost, I guess. So like, is that GRFP for sure going to cover all the costs you need, or like, how does that work in terms of coverage?
Good question. So this is kind of like a grad school fundamentals thing. There are some, like an MBA, for example, is a master's that you pay for, and it's really expensive. The program can be like $60,000. Generally for science masters, they're paying you to be a student. And that's where that stipend piece comes in, is like you're on a grant that they have and they're paying you through that grant. So for the GRFP, you are paying yourself through the GRFP. That's taking the place of the grant. So for most schools, and I don't want to say all because I don't know if there's different cases, but for most schools, this GRFP will be covering your tuition. It'll be covering your stipend. And like I said before, you get like a couple $1,000s to do your project, but it's not really funding the project, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
No worries. Yep. Okay. Other distinction, like I'm, just because it seems relevant, I am currently a grad student at UH and I am paying my own stipend with the GRFP. I do not have money for my research project. My advisor and I work together to get that funding from the outside. So we had that question earlier of, is this the avenue to apply for if you need funding for your project? The answer is no. It basically is covering your stipend and that's it. So that's another thing, is once you have the GRFP, a professor might admit you, and then you need to work with them to get funding for your actual project. This is all just like the grad school is such a weird, there's like a whole behind the curtain thing going on. So I'm just trying to like get a little peek for you into the behind the curtain, but I don't know everything, but okay. There are also teaching assistantships, yep, that you can use for your paycheck. You can get your tuition waived if you're like a TA or a instructor or anything like that. Ask departments if they can waive the application fee. For applicants to grad school, do you ask current grad students if they're able to afford living in that city with the stipends? Yes. Oh my goodness. So Hawaii has one of the highest costs of livings out there, and our stipend is, you can get by on it, but you're not saving a ton. So definitely ask the grad students if they can afford living there. Do they give all the money at once or every year or something? So I get a paycheck, so it's every 2 weeks. Because it's 34,000, divide that by 12 months divided by 2. I get a paycheck every 2 weeks, and that's how much my paycheck is every week. Or sorry, every 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other
I have one
questions?
question.
Yeah, go for it.
Thing. If we're gonna be doing some kind of like new research, like during like, let's say this fall, but like it's in October, the deadline.
Yeah.
Should we mainly talk about our mainly past research experiences? Because I mean, up until October, I don't know how much like, I don't know, like substantial research I'll be doing in this new project. So like, should it just be mainly like past stuff?
Great question. Okay, so a lot of people that are currently in undergrad are finishing up their senior year, right? And there's plenty of stuff that you can do in your senior year that you can write about. So the way I would approach that is, well, I guess by October, you'll have had 2 months of experience. Write about the 2 months of experience and then say, we are planning on doing X, Y, and Z in the next few months. So like if there's a paper coming out of it, say, I'm planning to publish a paper in December in this journal. That's a great thing to mention. Or, we've started the legwork on this. We're going to be doing this conference later. We're going to be going to this conference. We're going to be putting on a symposium so that we can present this research to the public. Like those are all the pieces that they want to see. And you can totally talk about what you will be doing soon because they understand that this is in October. It's like the beginning of the year. Also, if you're not currently involved in any like education and outreach or anything like that, clubs, organizations, take these few months to go see what's out there and start going to a couple meetings. And then you have something to write about. You can say, I'm a part of this organization. This year we will be doing this, that, and the other thing, which is a lot better than saying, hey, I'm not part of anything and I don't do any outreach type stuff.
I see. Thank you. But
Yeah.
also, should I like still talk more about like, I guess, past completed projects, you'd say, or would it be like both, or like whichever you think is most promising?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I did a senior thesis. That was my mosquito project. So at that point I had done coral and frogs. I had 1 paragraph for frogs, 1 paragraph for coral, and 1 paragraph for mosquitoes, which I hadn't completed yet. So I actually weighed them all equally.
Okay.
Like I didn't focus on the first 2. I like had a paragraph for each.
But
so it's
you
totally
said-
up to you.
You said you should always try to like find like a common theme through like all of them, right? Okay.
Yeah, any theme that you can have. And I chose the Pacific Islands like ecology as my theme, but I could have chosen like conservation. Like what if all 3 of those projects had to do with conservation? That's a theme, right? Like I really care about conservation. That's what I want to study. That's what I want to dedicate my life to and my grad career to. So any theme you can pull out, even if no matter what your research experiences seem like, you can find a theme, and I'm happy to help with that. If anyone like wants to Zoom, just be like, hey, I've done this, this, and this. How do they relate? So
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Also Lisa's amazing too. If you want to reach out to her, she's very responsive. So, okay. Do you know or have access to any guidelines available about reporting income to the IRS for a grant like the NSF? I don't. Like, I just, when you pay taxes, you tell them you're a grad student, you tell them what your salary is, like all of that. I don't know if there's anything specific.
Do taxes get taken out, when you're being paid every 2 weeks, Blake?
Yes. Yeah,
Oh,
it gets
that's great.
taxed just like a normal,
Oh, that's
normal
great.
job.
Yeah, so you don't have to pay quarterly installments to cover yourself like some private, consultants do.
Got it. No, I do not have to do that. They take out, usually the school will take out the taxes for you, and then you can submit tax returns and all that good stuff. Okay, any other questions? I'm here for another, 10 minutes, so feel free to ask any questions. If not, thanks for coming, everyone. It was great to meet you all. I hope this was helpful. If it wasn't, tell me and I'll fix my presentation.
That was very,
Thanks,
very
Blake.
helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
No problem.
you did a great job.
And feel free to stay on and ask questions if you want. I'll hang around.
A good one.
You too. Bye, everyone. Okay, here we go. Are there contacts for people who apply in social sciences? Because that is like not the field that I'm in, I don't personally have any contacts, but that's not to say that there's not people out there that have applied. So I'm not really sure what to say about that. Maybe look on Alex Lang's website and see if you can find the people that applied under social sciences and see if there's any successful applicants from that.
And there
Phil, then let
are
me-
some kind of divisions in the NSF that are social science. So you could contact program officers there, and that their names and numbers are listed on the web pages.
For sure. Any other questions?
Hi, is there a way to access your presentation for those of us, well, myself, who missed it, unfortunately?
Yes, we're going to send out to everybody who registered for this workshop. We're going to send out the slides and the video recording link.
Awesome, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming. Bye, everyone.